Good morning and good afternoon. Here is Karin Ekberg. Before we start with our today's webinar called Step by Step the Higg Verification Trail, Section 8, Chemicals Management, I would like to say a few words. We are experiencing very difficult times currently. The COVID-19 pandemic has an impact on the health of the people we care about, the businesses we rely on, the stability of the global economy, and our daily lives. In light of these unique and ever-increasing challenges that we all face at this time, we at Leadership and Sustainability would like to ask for your support as well. Because after all, our work has never been so tested, nor been more important, and we want to thank you all for your continued commitment to the environment and to the improvement of your environmental performance. And in this spirit, it is great to have so many participants joining this webinar. We from Leadership and Sustainability are looking forward to spending the next 1.5 hours with you. And this is the 8th in the series of webinars where we have taken you into depth of the different sections of the Higg FEM, the Facility Environmental Module. My name is Karin Ekberg, and I'm the founder and manager of the consulting company Leadership and Sustainability. I have spent nearly 35 years in the sustainability area, worked in many different sectors, but during the past 11 plus years, I have worked in the textile sector. And before I started my own company, I worked several years at Adidas in the role of Head of Environmental Services, responsible for environment globally. And this role also included developing the environmental strategy for the supply chain. So today we will be continuing with the last section in the Higg FEM, the chemicals management section. And as I mentioned, after our presentation, we will have time for your questions. And finally, we will make you an offer and present our team to you. First of all, let's understand where the different chemicals are located and where they are used in your factory. So we have lots of different processes where chemicals may be used. For example, in the dyeing, tanning processes, in fabric finishing, in screen printing, in metal finishing, if you are producing trims, for example, in footwear production, in primers, cements, and adhesives, but also in cleaning solvents, just to name a few areas where chemicals are used. So this is also the very first question you get in the chemicals management section. And it is a question related to the applicability. So similar to what we have in other sections as well, there are sometimes a few questions before the actual scored questions begin. And those questions apply to applicabilities. This is about understanding which processes and which questions that are really relevant for your business and for your factory. So it's always very important to respond to those questions about applicabilities really thoroughly. And in this case, you will be asked which processes you have in your factory, such as printing or dyeing, laundry or washing, leather tanning, fiber extrusion, etc. So please make sure that you respond to those questions in a very dedicated manner, because it will decide exactly how many questions you will receive, if you will receive all 23 questions in the entire chemical section, or perhaps just a selection of those. And the chemicals management section, it is the longest and most complex section in the Higg FEM, and also the most engaging and exciting actually. And here you can see an overview of the questions at level 1. In total, at level 1, we have 13 questions. So you can already see the chemicals management section is very, very comprehensive and also goes into a lot of detail. And also, if you remember how the scores are distributed among the levels. So every section can get a maximum of 100 points. And at level 1, usually you get 25 points. At level 2, 50 points. At level 3, 25 points. And also, in order to be able to move beyond level 1, so that level 2 and 3 questions also open up for you, you actually need to respond to all questions at level 1 with at least a partial yes. Some questions where there you can only respond with a yes or no. And then in those cases, you need to have a yes. And in some cases, it's also possible to respond by partial yes. So you may not have any response with a no at level 1, at any level 1 question. If you have that, the levels 2 and 3 will remain closed for you. And thereby, the maximum number of points you can get in that section will remain at 25. And then at level 2, you have another 3 questions. And at level 3, we have 7 questions. So in total, 23 questions. And now let's go and look at the actual questions one by one. So we begin here with the first question, and it asks you to develop a comprehensive inventory covering the following groups of chemicals: all chemicals used in manufacturing processes, all chemicals used in tooling and equipment, and all chemicals used to operate and maintain the facility. And here we have included an inventory template provided by ZDHC and the German Partnership for Sustainable Textiles. And you can, when you receive the presentation, you can go and download that template here with this link here down here. The inventory, it is the starting point for all good chemicals management systems. It should include all chemicals used in the factory, not only the chemicals used for production. And you need to know which chemicals you are using, and you need to document a lot of information in the inventory sheet that you are using. So here are some examples: chemical name and type, supplier and vendor name and type. You have to also record if you have a safety data sheet present. You need to make sure that they are also always updated. You should also include an information about the function and what type of usage you have for the chemicals, the hazard classifications, where the chemicals are used, for example, which building or process or machine, where it's used, the required storage conditions and storage location, which quantities you have, and also the number, the CAS number or numbers whenever you have a mixture. And furthermore, the lot numbers, so the chemical lot numbers, they give you potentially traceability back to the chemical supplier. So here we are talking about the chemical lot number that has been given by your chemical supplier. Then also you need to check MRSL compliance, the manufacturing restricted substances list, and we will speak more about the MRSL just a bit later. Purchase date, expiration dates, if applicable. And the chemical inventory needs to record the usage quantity information, and the quantity also needs to be updated at least monthly. A real-time tracking system needs to be in place at the storage warehouse, production, and temporary storage areas to track the usage quantity of the chemical. And the chemical inventory should also be updated whenever a new chemical is purchased. A new chemical addition also should initiate a worker training, a review of the existing PPE, addition perhaps of PPE if needed, review of any hazard and storage requirements, emergency planning and disposal requirements. And new chemicals should not be moved into storage until verification have taken place, that they match the purchase order, and that they have been added into the chemical inventory list, that you have CAS number, etc., and all the information. And then if your inventory is not yet complete, then you need to make an action plan for adding the missing data. So that's also important, and that is something that is being asked of you by the tool. So what we suggest here to upload is the chemical inventory, and also an action plan for obtaining data that is not included in your inventory. And even the best factories very often still have information that is missing in their inventory. So most of the time you do need to develop an action plan to obtain that data. So that was question 1. Question 2 the question is, does your facility make safety data sheet available to employees for all chemicals used? And this question is about making SDS available to all employees. It's very important that employees who are storing, handling, using chemicals have access to safety data sheets or simplified safety data sheets and are aware and knowledgeable about all chemical hazards. The safety data sheet should be updated at least every 3 years, or of course, if any change has taken place. And you need to check that with your chemical suppliers. They may not be sending you proactively new safety data sheets. You may need to add that into your planning, that you ask all your chemical suppliers on a regular basis to get the updated safety data sheets. And of course, also the workers, they also need to get trained. And here you are also asked to upload, for example, photo images showing that the MSDS or safety data sheets are available, that they are also global harmonization compliant, and also that they have the compliant label in cases where this SDS is not available. So CLP stands for classification, labeling, and packaging. And now moving over to training. Does your facility train all employees who use chemicals on chemical hazards, risk, proper handling, and what to do in case of emergency or a spill? And we suggest here that you upload a sample training content covered during the training, a training calendar, and an employee training attendee list. And here you have the option to select a partial yes, and you can do that if you do not have a complete documentation or if you may not have covered all topics that are listed. And the next question, question number 4, is about having a chemical spill and emergency response plan that is also practiced periodically. So we ask you to upload an emergency response plan and or the procedure, a training attendee list of a spill drill and photos of the drill. And you can select partial yes if you have a chemical spill and emergency response plan, but that does not meet all requirements or you do not have practice drills. Next question, question number 5. Does your facility have appropriate and operable protective and safety equipment as recommended by the Global Harmonized Standard safety data sheet or in all areas where chemicals are stored and used? And here we suggest that you upload the schedule for internal checks, audit for chemical safety, the inventory list of PPEs and safety equipment with schedules of stock, replenishment, equipment maintenance or replacements where applicable. And now question number 6, does your facility have chemical hazard signage and safe handling equipment in the areas of the facility where chemicals are used? And this is, of course, a very important question because this helps all your workers, even those who do not handle chemicals, to know where there are any hazards. So it's really important that you have signage everywhere and that you also have the correct signage. So you need to have signages that are clearly visible and understood by the employees and workers. Signage is posted at the storage and chemical operations area that also shows the hazard classification of the chemicals stored. And you also need to have handling equipment that is available at the relevant locations. And for facilities that do not use chemicals in production, this applies also to all tooling and operation chemicals in your factory. And we ask you here to upload, for example, schedules for internal checks and audit for chemical safety that covers relevant chemical exposure risks and communication, and also with a clear designation of responsibilities and outcome, of course, also of the checks and audits that you have done. So those were the first 6 questions. And now let's move on to the question 7. And here we are now coming into the area of the MRSL and RSL. So the question here is about purchasing according to MRSL and RSL. And let's take just a minute to learn what the difference between an RSL and an MRSL is. The restricted substances list. This is the list of chemicals that are restricted in the end product, in the final product that goes out of the factory. And this is all about consumer safety. And then the MRSL, the manufacturing restricted substances list. This is about all chemicals that are restricted in the manufacturing processes, so the chemicals that go into the factory. And here, so the MRSL manages and restricts the chemicals that are being used in the production or elsewhere in the factory. And of course, very often the MRSL and the RSL are connected with each other. In some cases, what you have in the MRSL or chemicals that you are using in production also go out of the factory on the product or in the product. But every so often you will have reactions taking place in the factory so that chemicals that go into the factory may not go out of the factory on the product. They may go out of the factory as air emissions or as water contamination or also as waste. And that is why it is so important to also have a manufacturing restricted substances list, because the MRSL is really about protecting the workers and also protecting the environment, whereas the RSL is about protecting the consumers, the people who buy the products and wear them. So the question is, does your facility select and purchase chemicals based on their hazards and their MRSL and RSL requirements? And it is important to develop a purchasing policy that clearly describes the purchasing and checking process for all incoming chemicals based on the MRSL and the RSL. And usually customers have communicated their respective MRSLs and or RSLs to you. If you have not received any MRSL or RSL from your customers, then the brand should be contacted and requested that they send those documents to you. If they do not have anything available for you, then you yourself need to develop an MRSL and an RSL. And for example, the ZDHC, the Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals Group, they have developed an MRSL, and you can download that document if you go to this link here. And actually, many brands are also referring to the ZDHC MRSL. So it can be used in those cases where they don't have a brand-owned MRSL. However, many brands still have their brand-owned RSL, restricted substances list. And the purchasing process should include a communication of the requirements that suppliers and subcontractors should follow, as well as guidance and a written declaration of compliance from suppliers and subcontractors. So this question asks you to have the chemical purchasing procedure, and it should cover a CUS number control, MRSL, RSL declaration, test reports, certificates, if applicable, positive lists, and you should also upload here, the MRSL applicable to the facility. Then furthermore, a chemical purchasing procedures and standard operating procedures should be uploaded, chemical supplier vendor criteria, any certificates of analysis of the chemical compositions that are available, the certificate of MRSL and RSL conformance and declaration letters, and also the conformance test reports as applicable. So there is a lot of documentation and there is a lot of thought that needs to go into the development of the purchasing policies and procedures in order to make this correct. And of course, if you're producing for several brands and they may have different requirements towards you, different RSLs, different MRSL requirements, you need to make sure that your own internal processes can conform to all those different requirements. And of course, also that your purchasing procedure is designed in a corresponding way. And then now moving on to the question number 8, health and safety. Does your facility have an environmental and occupational health and safety program specific to chemicals management? And this is, of course, a much broader or a very broad question. So a facility must identify health and safety roles and responsibilities and the appropriate control mechanisms to ensure health and safety, as well as a mechanism to reduce the potential for health and safety impacts. So also reduce the risks. Knowledge of the hazards and exposure routes and the information from STS is the starting point for such an EHS program. And here we ask you to upload, for example, letters of appointment, job descriptions, organization chart of the environmental health and safety responsibilities, team experience and training records, and furthermore, the EHS procedures related to storage, handling, usage, and disposal, permits with operating limits and relevant laws as applicable, and then also chemical incident and accident and spill records. And I also want to go into the hierarchy of measures that you can take to reduce the risks for your workers. And many factories I see, they start with PPE, with personal protective equipment, but that is actually not where you should start if you want to have a robust and really effective chemicals management program. You should start by replacing with lower toxicity chemicals or even avoiding the use of chemicals. And that's avoid chemicals is the best way, and then replace with lower toxicity chemicals. And we will see this at levels 2 and 3, many questions regarding this, this focus. And then you can also change your processes to reduce the exposure potential. You can isolate chemicals. You can have ventilation or engineering controls. Then you can have PPE. After you have implemented all those other measures, you can begin thinking about PPE. And then, of course, also any incident response. If you would have a spill, you need to make sure that you also have a good incident response. So the health and safety program that is talked about here in this question 8 is a very comprehensive program that you need to have in place that covers many areas. And now, when we go on to the chemical storage, so the question is, does your facility have well-marked designated chemical storage and temporary storage areas? And most factories would say yes. And then when we go out and have the factory tour, we very often see that the standards are not really met regarding safe and well-managed chemical storage. So what we need to have here is we need to have well-marked designated chemical storage and temporary storage areas. The chemical storage area needs to be ventilated. It should be protected from unauthorized employees, which means locked. It should also have an easy entry and exit in emergencies. So the entrances or exits should not be blocked, for example, and it should be easy to get out of the chemical storage area in case of any emergency. And the storage containers need to be in a good condition. They need to be closed, and they should also be clearly labeled with their contents. and with any hazard signage. And here we have a few examples of good practice. So here we have an intermediate bulk tank stored outside, an oil lubricant storage, a secondary containment bonding. So in any case, wherever you have liquid chemicals stored, you need always to have a secondary containment available. And this is a requirement as well from SAC, and something that we always look at when we do the factory tour. And of course, as you know, if you have been through a verification or perhaps another audit, you know that there is a big part of documentation review where we look at documents together and we discuss all the different areas together. But there is also a big portion of work where we go out in the factory together with you and you show us around and we look at every area where chemicals are stored. And of course, in the case of the Higg FEM, we look at all other areas, waste, storage areas, etc. as well. And there it's really important that we see that all chemicals that are used, that they are being stored according to according to best standards. And that was about storage. And now regarding employee training on MRSL and RSL. So the question is, does your facility train employees responsible for the chemical management system on restricted substances list and manufacturing restricted substances list? So important that training should cover the possible sources of hazardous chemicals, root cause analysis, and many other topics as well. And we ask you that you upload your training records with the names of the persons attending, dates, the topic of the training, brief description of what was trained, and possibly even the training material itself. Actually, the training material itself is very helpful to see if you cover all areas that should be covered. And now we have come to the question number 11, so one of the last questions at level 1. And this is about making sure that you are compliant to RSLs, to all RSLs that are effective for your facility. Does your facility have a documented process to systematically identify, monitor, and verify compliance with all product restricted substances lists? And so what we would like to see here is a written document specifying your review process, process recipes considering the usage of chemicals according to technical data specification sheets, and all chemicals in the inventory checked against RSL compliance on an annual basis, and letters of RSL conformance supported with test analysis. And the next question is similarly to, so the question number 11 was about RSL compliance monitoring, and now question number 12 is about MRSL compliance monitoring. Does your facility have a documented process to systematically monitor, update, and demonstrate compliance with MRSLs? And here we would like to see a chemical review process method, that chemical review process and methods are robust, that you have periodical screening through, for example, the ZTRC chemical gateway, that you have a certification letter of compliance to MRSL specific to each chemical product, that you have or that you have adopted systems that ensures MRSL conformance, for example, like a blue sign system. And when non-conforming chemicals are found, a phase-out plan needs to be developed accordingly. So for example, when ZTHC chemical gateway is used for screening, the facility tracks and monitors the level of conformance of each chemical screened. And then we would also like to see that the facility actively communicates the expectations for their dye and chemical to their dye and chemical suppliers, that formulation supply to the facility need also to be compliant with the MRSL. And the facility should be able to demonstrate a well-documented chemical review process. So that is really, really important again. And what we would like to see uploaded here, continuing the list, we would like to see positive lists from chemical suppliers, any email communication between the facility and its chemical suppliers regarding MRSL compliance where applicable, the letter of compliance to MRSL with the chemical name, date of issuance, and any test reports, the documented periodical screening process against the ZDHC chemical gateway, and finally, any dated records of previous screenings and schedule for future screening. So that was question 12, and now we have come to the last question at level 1. And this is a question about chemical traceability. And this is a question where we see very often see failures. We see that this is quite a difficult question for many facilities. And it's all about tracing your chemicals back from the production, from the manufacturing process, actually back to the chemical inventory, and thereby also to the supplier. So the purpose of traceability is determining whether the chemical components involved in the production can be traced backward and forward. And the ability to do so would help support any root cause investigations in case of any quality or compliance issue occur due to any particular chemical. And for example, if a recall of a product is needed, it's possible to recall the particular chemical that it was involved and find that chemical as well. So what we need to see here are the recipe cards with chemical formulation sheets, process instructions, containing all traceability information, the chemical inventory and the chemical process log. And we also need to see the chemical lot number. So you need to have the chemical lot number documented somewhere in the recipe or in the documentation that is linked to that actual batch of production that you have. And because that chemical lot number helps us then to go back to the inventory and also to go back to the chemical supplier. And with the chemical lot number, you are able to communicate to the supplier, to the chemical supplier, whenever you have had a failure and understand what the actual problem was. And so you can do the root cause analysis with the help of that chemical lot number. If you don't document the chemical lot number, it will not be possible. Even if you document the chemical that you're using, you may have been using different lot numbers because you may not know, even if you use a first in, first out approach in your chemical storage, you will never know exactly when you move over to another lot number by, for example, opening a new package of that same chemical that you're using. And that's why we would like to see the chemical lot numbers documented in the recipes in order to have to get a full response here and a yes response to the chemical traceability question. So quite a challenging question. And here is also one example of what it can look like. And there is now the full traceability from the final product. And this is a question that we will cover later. We have that question as well later. And then from the final product back to the chemical inventory and also therefore back to the chemical supplier. And so this is what we are asking for with a full traceability from the product to the manufacturing process and back to the chemical inventory. So question 13 doesn't start with the product. The question 13 starts here with the manufacturing process and wants you to be able to trace back to the inventory. And now we have already managed level 1, so we can move on to level 2. And question 14, does your facility have an implementation plan to improve your chemicals management program? And we would like to see an implementation plan with information about which questions that were not fully achieved and why, and the people responsible and the targeted date for achieving requirements for those questions which were not met. And this is a question uh, at level 2, so you actually already need to have responded with yes or partial yes to all questions at level 1, which means you are probably already well underway when it comes to chemicals management. But I assure you that even so, there is always something you can improve related to the questions 1 to 13. So don't be shy here. Make a good plan about how you would like to improve your chemicals management program related to the questions 1 to 13. And then the next question is about having an implementation plan to reduce the use of hazardous chemicals beyond chemicals specified by regulations and or restricted substances list and or manufacturing restricted substances list. So this question here goes even further. The previous question was an improvement plan for chemical management, basically everything that related to all questions at level 1. And here now, we are now really moving beyond level 1. Level 1 is very much about compliance, the RSLs and the MRSLs, etc. And here we want to see that you have a plan to reduce the use of the hazardous chemicals that you have found in your RSLs or in the MRSLs, and that you have a plan to at least beginning to phase out those chemicals. And the objective is really the removal of hazardous chemicals through the intentional creation of an action plan with targets, assigned responsibilities, and an action time frame. And this question does not require facilities to have in-house expertise to carry out a detailed hazard assessments here yet. Factories can have hazard implementation plans by relying on other externally available lists. And here what we ask you to upload is a hazardous chemical list with an action plan with assigned responsibilities and a time frame for action, and any alternative chemicals trials that you have been conducting or that perhaps your suppliers have been doing for you. And also, of course, with information about how you would like to proceed. If the conclusions were positive, if you would like to proceed with phasing out a specific chemical in the favor of another, or if the tests perhaps were not successful and you would like to test another chemical. So this question doesn't ask you yet to already have phased out any hazardous chemicals you have. It is really asking you to be working on this and having a good plan and a detailed plan to be able to reduce the use of hazardous chemicals. And now we go even further. And here now we are going to the well beyond, let's say, the really much more advanced question. So the question is, does your facility source already approved or preferred chemicals from a positives list beyond chemicals specified by regulations and or RSLs and or MRSLs? And a positive list is a list of substances which have been assessed for their human and environmental health impacts and performance properties and are recommended for use due to lower risks to the environment and human health and safety. So a positive list is not a list with chemicals screened according to an RSL or MRSL. It actually goes beyond that. So we were already at level 1. We were already making sure that we were not using chemicals that are restricted or were restricted in the RSLs and MRSLs. But here it's really about having the list of substances which have been assessed for their human and environmental health impacts and are recommended for use due to lower risk. So in order to answer yes here, you need to have more than 10% of your chemical formulations sourced from a positive list. And the percentage is based on the number of chemicals, not the volume. And then the positive lists that are approved by SAC are, for example, chemicals that have gone through the ZTHC chemical gateway, the Bluesign GOTS, and or Oecotex Eco Passport. And also, you can answer partial yes if you have chemicals from a positive list that make up less than 10% of your inventory. So you need to have at least, let's say, one chemical that is taken from a positive list in order to get a partial yes. And now the same question, but for facilities that do not use chemicals in production, and you can answer yes only if more than 50% of the chemical formulations in the chemical inventory are sourced from a positive list. And you can answer partial yes if you have chemicals from a positive list that make up less than 50% of your inventory. So this question here for facilities that do not use chemicals in production is actually stricter than the one for chemicals used in manufacturing. And so, the next question here, now the question 17, and now we are already at level 3, is does your facility collaborate with brands and or chemical suppliers to select chemicals for alternatives assessment? So now we are going even further. This is quite an advanced question. And I think it is really important to understand that in some of the sections of the Higg FEM, it's not so difficult to move on to level 2 and 3. But in the chemicals section, this is a really challenging section. And as you have already seen, a lot of details are being asked for and a lot of systematic procedures and management approaches and detailed instructions and standards, etc., are actually asked for by SAC. So please don't lose faith and don't give up. Take it step by step and build out your chemical management systems step by step. You don't need to reach 80 points in the first year or even in the second year. This is really a section that takes much more time to build up a really good program. And so this question, as I said, very advanced. Does your facility collaborate with brands and or chemical suppliers to select chemicals for alternatives assessment? And you can say yes here if you can also upload a prioritized list of alternatives for chemicals, basically based on substances of concern list, REACH SVHC list, or other lists, other candidate lists. The MRSL, the ZTHC MRSL also has a candidate list today. And also you need also to upload the minutes from collaborative meetings. So just to understand this is a question where you do need to have a collaboration project in place. You need to specifically work with brands and or chemical suppliers to select at least one chemical for an alternatives assessment. And so it's not enough if you have just identified one chemical that you would like to work on. You really need to have a collaboration process in place, and you need to be able to show that you are in engagement with the brand and or the chemical supplier to really select the chemicals for this alternatives assessment. And very often you may not have the resources yourself to do a lot of tests or do a lot of assessment, but very often your chemical suppliers may have that. They may have data that can help you, and sometimes the brands have this information as well. And now moving on to the question number 18. Does your facility contribute to chemical analysis against human and environmental hazard criteria to this alternatives process? And you can answer yes here if you have conducted hazardous chemicals assessments, or at least one, if the facility is also using that information to prioritize and has created an action plan with clear implementation towards safer alternatives, and the hazardous chemicals assessment has been conducted and the facility is using this in the plan, and the assessment should also include an evaluation of the hazard associated with a hazardous substance together with an assessment of the exposure. So this is also a question that goes very deep because to conduct such a hazard assessment, it probably needs a specialist or at least a lot of guidance from your chemical supplier in order to be able to do this. You need to have a lot of different criteria for human and environmental hazard and understand how they work and how they can be applied in this process. And then the question number 19, this is about life cycle impact analysis. Does your facility contribute an analysis of life cycle impacts to this alternatives process? And you can upload, for example, if you have been using the Blue Sign the Blue expert assessment, if you have conducted life cycle assessment studies, or if you have documented metrics for water, energy waste, etc., or perhaps any third party's assessment. This question may not be so difficult to respond to because we are here really looking at having the combination of the chemical improvement or the better chemical, so to say, in combination with, for example, a smaller water footprint. So let's say you are using a new dye stuff that reduces the amount of chemicals used, is less hazardous, and also reduces the amount of water needed in the process. So in case of if you have done tests with such a new dye stuff and you have the metrics with all the information, what it looked like with the previous dye stuff you were using, and then the metrics with the new dye stuff, then you can also say that you have contributed to such a life cycle impact analysis. And now the next question, the question number 20, goes back again to the traceability that we were talking about when we were speaking about question number 13. And here we ask you to trace back from the final product back to the chemical lot number and thereby to the manufacturer. So let's go back to that picture here again. Here you see the total, the full traceability from the product, from the end product, over to the manufacturing and back to the inventory and thereby also to the chemical supplier. So, for example, if there would be any problem with a product that it has perhaps a too high level of a certain chemical, then it should be possible to, with the product number or product order number, it should be possible to trace back the whole way back to the chemical supplier. So let's go back to question number 20 again. And here we ask you to upload the product batch card, recipe cards, formulation sheets, process instructions, chemical mixing, blending process log, lab records, and the chemical storage log. So basically, you should be able to show, and during verification, if you are asking for external verification, we will actually ask you to show all those documents, and we will be tracing back from a few products back to the chemical inventory in order to see that you have that process fully implemented. And the next question, question 21, is about the quality assurance program. Does your facility have a documented quality assurance program that includes performance of chemicals? And you can answer yes here, only if you have a process in place to randomly select and verify a chemical's compliance to a known standard, such as an MRSL or RSL, via a chemical analysis and on at least an annual basis. And the QA program should include the evaluation of the quality and performance efficacy of each chemical formulation used, ensuring that the process recipes of how each chemical formulation are to be used are strictly followed, that the process controls are strictly followed, and that there is an ongoing assessment of production quality with supporting records. So we see many facilities that actually have at least parts of this quality assurance program, also usually because they have had RSL programs in place for a long time. But this question is actually quite comprehensive. So you need to make sure that you really fulfill all requirements here. And now the next question is question 22, contractor and subcontractor regarding preferred chemicals. So do your contractors, subcontractors source already approved or preferred chemicals from a positives list to replace chemicals not already included in RSL, MRSL? So similar to what we have in the EMS, in the environmental management system section, where you are also asked if you are working with your suppliers and with your subcontractors to use the Higg FEM. Here too, you are asked to basically roll out parts of the Higg FEM, namely the positive list and the preferred chemicals application, also to your suppliers and your subcontractors. So you should here also upload a description of the procedures you have, any communication with the suppliers and subcontractors showing confirmation of the practice of sourcing chemicals from positive lists, and any Higg verification report, if that is available, showing that they meet the criteria. So this is also a question that is probably needs some time also to prepare. Of course, you yourself need already to be able to use a positive list in a constructive way, and you need to have your own procedures for doing so. And then you can begin educating, making aware, and engaging your contractors and subcontractors to also begin sourcing preferred chemicals. So it's also a question that actually may need quite some work to establish and to fulfill. And now we have come to the final question number 23. And this is a question that goes even further beyond everything we have been talking about so far. And it asks you, does your facility have documented business goals, processes, and actions showing commitment, for example, regarding equipment, process, choice of substitute chemicals, to new sustainable chemistry innovation? Of course, lots of the things that you have been doing in order to reply to the previous questions already show that you have a commitment, but you also need to now go into your own business and really implement sustainable chemistry innovation practices into your business practices. So chemicals management, and anyway, any environmental management should not be something you do on the side. You should always try to incorporate it and implement it into your normal business practices. So this question is very much about that, being able to show that your business, in all your management decisions, that you take sustainable chemistry innovation into account when you take your decisions. So what we would like to see is, for example, any current chemistry R&D projects or investments that you have, and also examples of how you have incorporated responsible chemistry into your own business agreements and how you take then your decisions. And here is one final slide related to chemistry innovation, and here are just a few examples, probably all well known to you already. And of course, this list is very short. In reality, there are lots of different innovative practices you can implement related to sustainable chemistry. And so here, for example, salt-free dyeing, waterless dyeing, there are lots of different dyeing processes that use less water or use no water at all. Being able to recover, reuse chemicals, bleaching without chemical, for example, with ozone, solvent-free processing, electrochemical dyeing processes, and many more. So those are just a few examples. And with that, we have actually come already to the questions and discussion. And now I would like to open up for your questions, and I will go and have a look here if you have already sent a few questions to us. So let me see here. Yes, we have questions. Let me see. Yeah, okay. This is a good question. So the training, how often should the training be of employees? And yes, I would say it should be at least twice a year. If you have processes that are changing, or if you are using new chemicals, you may need to have a training more often. And of course, also if you have new employees that come in that need to be trained, they need to be trained as well. I actually think that a quarterly training is actually quite a good frequency to use. And then an interesting question here. There is a recommendation to remove all the health and safety related questions from the FEM chemical section. People say that those health and safety questions should be under social and labor concern. So you know that we have the Higg FEM, the facility environmental module, and we have also the FSLM, the Facility Social and Labor Module, or this program is also called the SLCP, the Social and Labor Convergence Program. That's the same. And this SLCP, FSLM takes care of all social and labor questions. And in that module, there are a lot of health and safety questions as well. And now the question is, should we remove the health and safety questions from the facility environmental module because they are already covered in the health and safety section in the SLCP FSLM? Well, my opinion is I wouldn't remove them, because I think that health and safety is very much related to environmental matters. It is, of course, related to worker safety as well. But it is linked to environmental matters. And that's why it is so important to consider health and safety aspects whenever you consider any environmental aspects. For example, if we have waste separation, if the waste is not separated well, if you have hazardous waste that is not being stored well, your workers will be impacted by that. If they have to handle hazardous waste without the appropriate PPE or safety equipment, we have health and safety impacts on the workers. If the chemicals are not stored correctly, we have impact on the health and safety of the workers. And of course, for those people who understand a lot about the chemicals and have studied the SDS and have produced the information that is located at the different storage locations, they also need to make sure that the workers are protected. So in my view, health and safety is very, very much linked also to environmental concerns, and of course also to social and labor concerns, since it is all about protecting workers. But yes, so my opinion is that to make a long answer a bit shorter, I think that health and safety should continue to be linked to environment as well. All right. Let's see. Yes, another question here. If a facility has a Blue Sign partnership, a system partnership, so it's accredited basically to Blue Sign, Does it mean that it is equivalent to levels 1 and 3 of the chemicals management of FEM? Yes, this is a really good question, and I wish I could respond yes or no in a clear way. I cannot do that because SAC and the Higg FEM, they have not implemented any equivalency process. There is no direct comparison to any other external program. So it's basically not possible to say. But if you have a facility that has gone through a Bluesign audit and is a system partner to Bluesign, they will have managed many of the things that the Higg FEM is also asking the facility to manage. Okay, then we have many more questions here. Let me see. Yes. If a facility have achieved all level 1 questions, how are they able to answer the question 14 improvement plan? Yes, it's I have asked myself that question as well. I think it is a bit a strange question to get. You have already achieved all level 1 questions, and then at level 2, which has opened up for you, you get that question on about how to improve at level 1. But my interpretation is that there is always something you can improve related to the first 13 questions, all the questions at level 1. Perhaps your inventory is not yet that complete. Perhaps your purchase procedure can be improved or communicated better. Perhaps your training programs can be better. Perhaps your spill and emergency response plans can be improved. So there are, and traceability perhaps can be improved as well. So I think there is always something you can improve and that you can then include into your question 14 improvement plan. Yeah, but I understand why you are asking that question, absolutely. And then, yes, one very specific question regarding the slide 36, are the certifications as GOTS, Oekotex, Bluesign, do they have similar requirements regarding chemical handling, etc.? No, they have not. They have very different requirements, and not all of their requirements are communicated publicly either. So it is not even possible to, in a fair manner, compare the requirements they have regarding chemical handling, unfortunately. So as I said, there is no equivalency process that has been implemented yet. Yes, and then the 10% is based on what? And the 10% is regarding the question number. Let's go back to that question. That is the question. Let me see. Yeah, here. That is the question about sourcing from a positive list or a preferred chemicals list. And you need to have at least 10% of the chemical formula, 10% of the chemical formulations sourced from a positive list. And here we are speaking about the number of chemicals, not the volume. So if you have, let's say, 100 different chemical formulations that you are using, then you need to have more than 10 of them. So let's say you need to have 11 of the chemical formulations you are using need to be sourced from a positive list. Yeah. And yes, and the same question, if anyone completed all questions in level 1, then which can be the improvement plan? Yes, you need to have something that you can improve. I'm sure you can find something that that may be possible to improve. And yes, we will send you this deck. So all of you who are online now and have registered, you will receive an email from us within 1 or 2 days after the webinar with both the presentation deck as a PDF and also with the recording itself. We have some very detailed questions. I may need to follow up on them via email offline. Yes, there is one question. If this training that we are doing here now in this webinar will be considered as a qualification approval of the Higg chemical management verifier along with other auditor experience. No, this is not. This is just a training. It is not. It's not a qualification for to become a verifier. In order to become a verifier and a chemical specialist verifier, there are specific requirements that have been defined, but training is not something that is included in the qualification criteria. So we have more questions. Let me see. Yes, we have one question here also regarding the CAS numbers. So if the CAS number is not available, what do you then use? So of course you need to still have a safety data sheet that clearly explains all hazards and the protection measures, etc., according to the SDE standards. And then any other identification number that you have. And if that chemical formulation has already been pre-approved, according, for example, to the ZDHC chemical gateway, then it should be okay to use this chemical. But I guess there is also some availability about the mixture of the chemicals in that formulation. Are there any tools for traceability of chemicals? No, there are no specific tools available. Many companies use their own production software systems or their PLMs to build traceability schemes. We have one question here about carbon footprint. And yes, carbon footprint is a really important topic. We didn't cover this in this webinar. This webinar really focused only on chemicals management. And carbon footprint is a very specific topic that needs to be covered elsewhere. We can take up an offline discussion about that. One question, does the inventory, the chemical inventory list, need to consolidate into one single file, or can I manage multiple inventory lists for different department use, for example, R&D, production, wastewater? Yes, you are allowed to have the chemical inventory split into several documents. You just need to know where you can find the information and be able, of course, to show it then during verification if you are doing a verification. But it is allowed to have different documents to store the information. A question, will you arrange training programs for other sections like EMS, air emissions, waste management? Yes, we have already done so. This is the last in a series of webinars about all sections. And when you receive this presentation deck, you will also see all the links to all the other trainings that we have been conducting, the short trainings. And then if you can follow the Inditex list as a positive list, I actually don't know the exact composition of the Inditex list, so I am not able to respond to that question. Then what is meant by contractors and subcontractors? Well, those are your suppliers. The companies that provide you with goods, with fabrics, with chemicals, with trims, etc. And subcontractors, they are suppliers that do a certain part of your process for you. It can be, for example, that they do cutting for you. They may be doing finishing for you, but they are only doing one portion of your process, and the products come back to your facility afterwards. That's when we talk about subcontractors. but it's basically any type of suppliers that is meant here with this question. Is there any standard or guideline on how to dispose of old torn screens used in table printing? Well, most of the time, they would be a hazardous waste, classified as hazardous waste, depending, of course, on the type of printing that you are using and printing chemicals that you are using. But this it depends on your local legislation. So there is no general response to this. You need to find that out in your local legislation and then review which waste disposal technologies that are available. And we also covered waste in the previous webinar, and you can find the link also later in the presentation. Is there an improvement plan for facilities to achieve level 1? No, there is no specific improvement plan, more than that you go through question by question and build your own plan on how you can respond and how you can fulfill the requirements in the respective question. Yes. The requirements related to storage of chemicals and point of use of chemicals are different, which means that at point of storage of chemical factory, can they have a solid or concrete floor to avoid spill rather than having secondary containment under each chemical drums? Yes, that you can do that. You just need to make sure that the floor where the chemicals are standing, that you basically can collect any chemical spills and protect that chemical spill so that it doesn't flow out into the factory, for example. But it is possible to do that. What is important is to have this secondary containment in any form. It doesn't need to be for each and every chemical if you have built a good system to cover, for example, a certain department of your chemical storage. Yes, and I missed, let me see here, it scrolls up again. We have lots of questions, let me see. Great, thank you. Yes, so we also have that question about positive lists again. And so let me just explain what a positive list is. So a positive list, it is a list of substances and they have been assessed for their human and environmental health impacts and performance properties and are recommended for use due to lower risks to the environment and health and safety. So it's not that they have only been screened against an RSL or an MRSL, but they have really been selected because they are much less harmful than many other chemicals. So they should have been screened for their performance and been found to be basically what you could call safe chemicals, at least from the standpoint of what we know today. We have also one other question. If a facility environment clearance certificate is overdue for more than a year and factory shows only renewal application copy for that, then how this will be treated? Is this about your operating license? Could you clarify that? So in general, my recommendation is that you should always make sure that you renew any certificates or permits well in advance of when they expire. So if you know that the authorities take 2 months in order to renew a permit, then please make sure that you request and apply for the renewal several months before they expire, so you don't come into that situation. So I cannot respond to that to that question specifically or more detailed than that. What is minimum marks one should achieve in level 1, 2, and 3? There are, in that sense, no minimum marks you need to achieve. It is up to you to decide which progress you want to have and how fast you want to improve according to the Higg FEM. Obviously, you need to first reach level 1 before you are even allowed by the system to move on to levels 2 and 3. So if you haven't responded with yes or partial yes to all questions related to level 1, then you will not even see the questions at levels 2 and 3. However, it may be that you have buyers or brands buying from you who are asking you to reach a certain score or a certain mark, but that is of course up to the brands to do so. Yeah, we still have some questions left, but we are also running out of time. So what we will do here is I will respond to those questions offline, so to say, and make sure that you get the information you need. All right. Okay. So with that, I would like to continue and finish off this presentation. Let me move on. I have some information that I want to show you, and especially for you, I saw there were several questions about receiving the information from this webinar and from the previous webinars. So on this slide here, you can see all the webinars that we have done related to Higg FEM, where we have taken you through all the sections one by one. So when you receive this presentation, you can go and click on those links and you will find the information related to each of those webinars. And then I want to offer our services as well regarding the FEM and the SLCP verification. We are an approved verifier body and training body for both FEM and for SLCP, and we would be happy to support you with your verification. We are also happy to support you with training, with one-day trainings, for example. Many of you may be locked down as we are here in Germany as well, but we can also offer trainings via webinars. For example, a full day training that we usually do face-to-face, a full day, we can split it up into 2 or 3 webinar sessions, since it's usually too long to sit in front of the screen and listen to a webinar for a full day. And then here is the list of the countries where we are allowed to offer verification, Higg FEM verification and training. So you see the list is very long. Also some exotic countries where probably no verifications have taken place yet, but we have already conducted verifications in many countries already. So please do not hesitate to contact us. And if you would like to have a training or a verification. And you can do that by go to, for example, our booking page, and there you can book a time slot with me personally, or you can also contact us here. My email address is hidden behind this link, Aladdin Okur in Turkey, or in Bangladesh, we have Sally Abu that you can contact, but we have other regions where we have local people as well. And then we also offer a few more webinars. Those are paid webinars. This is about materiality assessment, sustainability strategy, and sustainable supply chain management. 2 or 3 hours webinar, and you can find more information if you click at the corresponding links here. And with that, we have come to our final slides, and now I would like to present our team to you. So here you can see our team. We are growing steadily. And yes, thank you so much for joining this longer webinar this time. And I hope that it has been helpful and valuable to you. And please take the 2 minutes to respond to the survey that you will see as soon as we log off from this webinar. Thank you so much for joining today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we are wishing you all the best. Thank you and goodbye.